Hey guys, Joshnic here. Today's video, I'm going to be breaking down one of my most recent mixtapes. I'm going to be showing you how I put these together in Ableton. All the big guys are making their mixes in their DAWs. It makes it sound a lot cleaner, a lot louder as well. And the beauty of working in a DAW rather than trying to record your mix live on your decks at home is it means you can actually just work on this bit by bit, and you can always come back to it and make changes later if you need to do that. I like doing that because usually halfway through my mix, I may not like how these two songs work together. So I might actually swap one out for a different song, or I might just delete them all together and just continue the mix from there. It's a lot more flexible, and you know, if you make mistakes, you can always go back and just fix things up rather than having to re-record your mix from scratch. So when you're opening up your session to start your mixtape, the first thing I always do is I go up to the BPM tab up the top left. Just click that and type in whatever BPM it is that you're going to be playing. Some people like to change BPMs while their mix is going, which is something that I do as well. You can see here that I actually changed down to 145 BPM twice, and then towards the end it actually goes up to 155. The reason why I do this is just so that your beat grids, which are these things here, remain constant with the music that you're actually playing. So if you're playing tracks at 150 BPM, make sure that your session is set to 150 BPM, because when you're trying to line songs up together, say for instance these two tracks here, having it at 150 BPM means every every section like this is exactly in time with the music that you're playing. So just something that you should definitely be doing when you're making your mixes. Now the first thing is, when you're putting this together, you obviously need to be able to get your songs in line with each other and make sure that they're playing, in sync with each other. The way I do that is I'll get my two tracks. This is the track that I want to be mixing out of. I'll grab a random song out of iTunes. Now MP3s will always have a slight gap of silence at the beginning of the track. It's just how their codec, I guess, compresses and works with the file. So what you'll need to do is you'll actually need to zoom into your track, click on this little triangle here and just drag it over until it's right at the beginning of the first sound. Depending on how your track starts, for instance, this one I believe will start with a kick. Yeah, so that's an easy one to use. Some tracks will start off with like a melodic intro, or it's quite quiet at the beginning of the track, and that doesn't work. So you'll actually need to go further along into the track and find, say, a point like this where there's the kick of that track there. What I do is I hit Command E, that will do a split. It will split the track there, and then I just need to zoom in here. Oops. Zoom in, grab that little triangle and just bring it across till it's in line there. So then what that means is I can zoom out, drag this out like so, and that track is perfectly in time with the rest of the session here. I always just go and do a quick scan through just to ensure that the kicks are still lining up with every section in my grid, and it is, so the BPM is right. If they're not lining up, it means your BPM is out. All you need to do is just click on your track, go into warp, change your warp mode to complex pro, and I set my formats to 50. Then you just change your BPM till you get to the BPM that your track is. This one's already at 150, so I don't need to do that. And if your track is the BPM, the same BPM as your Ableton session, I would just leave the warp mode off, because you don't want to be changing anything with the sound unless it needs to be changed. And then once that has all been sorted, it's just a matter of dragging it until it's in line with the part of the song that you want to start mixing in, and then you go from there. This is a great example of a transition in my mix. So I've got two tracks here. Now, what I do firstly is, once I've got them lined up where I want them to be, I'll go and do an EQ8. I'll put an EQ8 on both tracks. So for instance here, you can see in my automation that this is currently set to on, and then once it reaches this point here, it turns off. At the same time, this is currently off, and once it reaches that same point in time, that turns on. Now in this EQ, and this is what I usually do for most of my transitions, it's just a high pass. So I'll go in here, set that to a high 4. Usually I set it to 120. Sometimes I'll bring it up anywhere up to 200, but generally 120 is a good number to start off with for most tracks. So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm emulating as if I was mixing on a set of decks and a mixer, where I'd have 2 tracks playing or 2 build-ups playing. One has the bass up, the other has been switched off. And then this automation here, this point here, is essentially like me getting the bass knobs and switching them at that point in time. Except this is done instantly, so it's a lot cleaner than doing it on a set of decks. So if I play this track here, you'll see what I mean. So playing it from here, there'll be no low end, and then on that point, the low end will come in. Same here, you'll hear the low end, and then at that point in time, it'll drop off. And then on that last little bit, it did go a little bit quieter. All I did is I double clicked on that and I just brought the volume down here. So I brought it to -2. You can change it to whatever you want. I like to do my volume changing within the clip itself. You can do it with like a utility and just automate the utility, but don't touch the volume knob in here, because if you leave this with no automation, it means you can do what I'd call like a master or a global volume change across that entire track if you needed to change it, rather than going through and doing all the changes individually. The last thing I do with some transitions, it just depends on the song. If I want to slowly bring a track in, rather than doing a volume automation, I'll just find a section of the track that I want to fade in. If you press A on your keyboard, if you're using Ableton 10, it'll take you out of automation mode and it will bring it back to this other mode. I don't really know what they're called, but it will give you these fade in and fade out tabs that you can drag across. You can crossfade, do whatever you want. I just like to bring that in as a fade in. You can change the curve if you want to. I usually leave it like that. Sometimes I'll go through and be a bit more finicky if needed. So that's basically one transition there. It's just EQing and fading in, fading out. The next thing is my double drops. Now for double drops, there's a few things that I do. One of them is I actually sidechain the second track that I'm layering over the top of it, just so that I don't have 2 kicks and 2 snares fighting over each other in the mix. I find if you have just your main track's kick and snare punching through and the other track will actually duck on each of those kicks and snares, it's gonna sound a lot cleaner than it would if you were just mixing it on your set of decks and mixer at home. So a good example is this one here. So these 2 tracks, when I think about my double drops, I kind of think of them as an A and B track. My A track is the main track. It has the low end going, kicks and snares are pumping through. And the B track is what I would sort of almost refer to as like the flavor of the double drop. So it's the second track that's layered on top of it. Usually I'll bring the volume down on that a slight bit so they're not fully fighting each other in the mix. Again, it just depends on the double drop and the track that's playing. And on that second track, I will cut out the low end with an EQ. Sometimes I'll bring the mids down a little bit. Usually anywhere between 2 to 6 dB is enough to make them sound good with each other. And then for the side chaining itself, it's pretty simple. What I'll do is I set up a side chain and trigger channel. So for the side chain I just set that up as an audio channel. I've got Shaperbox on mine. That's what I use for all my side chaining. You can use LFO tool. You can use the stock Ableton compressor. It's really up to you. It's how you side chain. With my Shaperbox, I have it set up at a 3/16, I think is what it's called. The beat mode here I set to MIDI 1-shot and beat 1-shot, because I'm going to use a MIDI track to control when I actually want it to be side chaining. I don't want it to side chain every single beat, just when I want it to. So once I've got that all set up, I'll set a new MIDI track and I'll put a external instrument on there. So it'll be sending MIDI from this track here to my sidechain channel and into Shaperbox. If you have more than one plugin or effect on that channel, it will come up with multiple different options, but for this one, it's just Shaperbox. Now on your sidechain channel, you do want to just make sure that these modes here are set to in. You can set it to auto, but I just set it to in. It just to ensure that it's going to be playing back any of the audio that's being sent into it. And for your trigger, I just have a MIDI note. It doesn't matter what note it's on, as long as there is a MIDI note there, it's going to tell Shaperbox every time that MIDI note plays to duck the volume. So you'll be able to hear here, if I just solo the sidechain. If I deleted that, it's going to sound like this. So with the track that you do want to have sidechained, if you didn't see what I just did there, I just went into here and I'm sending it, instead of to the master, which is your default, you need to send it to your sidechain channel. So that's essentially routing your audio to the sidechain, and is then going to be ducked every time that that MIDI note gets triggered. And again, in that track as well, I've just brought it down to dB just so that it's a little bit under and it can kind of just sit on top there. With my double drops as well, I did have a triple drop at this point in the mixtape. Same concept as before. I've just got my tracks laid out. Blue Bomber is my A track, and then California Style and Next Hype VIP are my B tracks. Now, because this is kind of chopping between different tracks, you can see, like for instance here, California Style is the only part playing, or in this fake drop here, or whatever you want to call it, I've got part of one track playing here, part of the next here, and then they're kind of doubling up. So they're kind of chopping and changing between them. And with my automation as well, you'll actually see that my EQ 8 is being switched on and off at different points of the track depending on what's playing, mainly because, like for instance here, where it's just the California Style playing,
West side rolling in, I'm dumping.
if I had that just on the whole time,
West side rolling in, I'm dumping when I
there's no low end and there's no need to cut it out because it's not clashing with anything else. So I've just kind of got it flicked on and off. And then for Blue Bomber, I've actually just brought out a fair bit of the mids here, just because I've got 3 tracks playing. I don't want it to sound completely messy. So I thought if I bring out some frequencies that I don't need in this track, I can let the other tracks sort of shine through and fill that little gap there. So I'll show you how these sound individually, and then I'll just sort of play it together so you'll see how this sounds. Hear that sidechain going. Same there as well. And then all together it sounds like this.
West side rolling in, I'm dumping when I see some.
Now you might be asking me, why is your master in the green when you've got 3 tracks playing all at the same volume, all at the same time? Now, it's a little secret. It's called Isotope Ozone 7 Maximizer. You can use any limiter you want. I like the Isotope Ozone ones. It just works for me. This is the same preset I've been using for years with all of my edits. It's actually Edits Master, as you can see here. I've just saved it as a preset. All it is just the maximizer from Ozone. I've set it to IRC4 and the mode is on modern. Threshold and ceiling are both at 0, and then character, stereo, unlink, and transient emphasis are all off, or they're not being affected at all. And all this is doing, it's just shaving off anything above 0 dB, just so that it's not redlining and it's gonna sound a bit cleaner. And it really doesn't make much difference in the actual quality of your sound, even when you've got 3 tracks playing at the one time. So if I'll show you in the mixer view here, it's going to be peaking around 8 or 9 dB. But when I turn this on, it's going to bring it back to 0, keep it in the green, but you're not going to really notice any loss in volume or quality of the sound. So I'll show you here. So this is what I would put on all of my mixtapes. It's the only thing I have on the master, just so that when I'm doing things like double dropping, or I find sometimes if you're speeding up a song, so if you have a song that's actually 140 BPM, you've sped it up to 150, even that as the only thing playing, it will peak. It's just, I don't know why, it's just something that happens when you speed up tracks, they get louder. Same thing for slowing it down. So I just have that on the master, shave off any unnecessary things that are going to make a clip, and that keeps everything at a good volume, and it's still, you know, good quality, really easy and clear and easy to listen to. Now there's a couple more things I want to cover quickly. The next thing just being how I will, I guess, smooth over some transitions. So like for instance, when I'm playing on a live set, usually I like to use reverb if I want to sort of mask a transition between one track and another. The way I kind of replicate that in Ableton, I could just use the stock reverb plugin, or I could use other reverb plugins. I actually use an effect rack called Bassclef's Easy Washout. Now this actually has a bunch of different effects within it. So it's got some delay, filter, EQ and reverb. Now essentially the way I would describe it is as you turn the washout knob up, it starts to cut out the low end, it introduces some delay, and it just turns up the wet on the reverb. I've copied this same automation across both of these tracks here because this is actually a double drop, so I want both of them to be affected in the same way at the same time. And this is how they sound together with the effect, and you'll sort of hear the reverb and the delay going on here. And in the mix itself, it sounds like this.
As the darkness moves in and out of you.
Now, if I was to turn those off, have a listen to the difference there.
As the darkness moves.
The change in songs is a bit sudden. Sorry, no pun intended, but it's a hard cut between the tracks. Whereas having that rack on there just helps smooth things over and helps mask the fact that I've just changed songs. I'll leave a download link for this rack in the description. I think everyone should be using this. It's a really, really good rack, and it just sounds amazing. Now, the next thing I'll cover here, and you may already see this, but in my master channel here, I've got my BPM automation here. There's a hard cut between 150 and 145. Reason being, because this is essentially like a, what do they call it? Like a drop swap change, or whatever you want to call it. I don't need to gradually bring the BPM down because this is the only thing that's playing at this point in time. Whereas if I scroll through to this part, you can see that the BPM does gradually change from 145 all the way to 150. And that's when you're playing, you know, two songs over the top of each other. For instance, this is over a build-up. So the reason why I've done that is so I can gradually bring up the BPM, and then on the actual drop, I've just got it at 150 there. And when you're doing these sorts of changes, you need to make sure that you've done, you've actually gone into your track and you've hit the warp mode, got the BPM set correctly, and have all that ready to go before you do any automation on your BPM. If you look at this track here, for instance, there's only one warp point, and that's right at the beginning because that's where I've already set that up. If I was to say, just put that there for an example, I've turned that off. So there's no warp point or anything set up. If I hit warp now, while there's some automation on the screen, look at the warp points. There's a lot of them. Because what it is, it's putting a warp point for every single change in the BPM as it's gradually going along. Whereas if I was to just remove that automation, so it's staying at the same BPM, turn this on, have that all ready to go, notice something? There's only one point. If I then go and automate this, look at that. No new points. So this is something you need to make sure you do before you do the automation, because otherwise if you have these points here and then you hit play, it's way out of time. So having that all organized beforehand will then keep everything in line in the beat grid. So as you can see here, everything is still all good. Cool. That's basically everything covered in terms of how I put my mixes together. If you were to scroll through every single track, all it is EQ, sometimes a bit of washout, EQ, washout, EQ, washout. That's all you need to be able to put a mix together. Is just getting all your tracks in line, EQing out the bits that you need to do that for, and sometimes, adding some reverb or washout just to smoothen some of those transitions. The last thing I need to show you is just how I export everything. So I have everything off here. I don't change anything, leave that all off. You don't need to save it as a lossless WAV or AIFF unless you want to. The reason being, when you upload to SoundCloud, it converts everything down to, I think, a 192 kilobits per second or something like that. So having a WAV or a 320 MP3 is not going to make a difference, because at the end of the day, they reduce the quality for streaming purposes, so it doesn't matter. So I just set it to an MP3, constant bitrate 320. If you're running Ableton 9, I think this looks a bit different, or maybe it can't do an MP3. If so, just render it as whatever. It doesn't matter at the end of the day, but having it as an MP3 will save you space and time for uploading and exporting it as well. So that's pretty much everything covered for that one today. I'm going to be posting some more content over the next couple of weeks. Being stuck at home, not having any work or anything to do, giving me a lot of chance to produce some more content for you guys, and just, I guess, keep myself entertained while I'm stuck in isolation. If there's anything that you want me to cover, if there's something that, or maybe I glossed over and didn't really explain properly in this video, just feel free to send me a message and I can go through and explain it for you. If you've got anything else you want me to cover for future videos, feel free to message me as well, and I can work on it and get some more tutorials happening. I hope you guys liked the video anyways. If you learned something new, please leave a comment, the thumbs up, it really helps me out. Feel free to subscribe to the channel, because I will be posting more content in the coming weeks. And until then, I'll be seeing you guys in the next one.